All right, Brian, the last thing that we're going to talk about today is the reasons for optimism that we have for this passing offense. We spent some time breaking down where they need to get to, what it means for them to get there, what we would like to see, what have been the issues of the past. But there's a lot of reasons why we feel extremely confident in the trending upwards direction of this offense. And we saw little snippets of it in the postseason, but now we need to see it over the course of the season. So where do you start? When you start thinking of reasons for optimism, where are you at?
Mike Denbrock. I mean, that's my biggest reason for optimism because I've seen what he can do when he runs an offense. We saw it at Notre Dame. What's the last explosive passing attack Notre Dame had? It was in 2015. I mean, they had, and this is why I keep saying, like, Mike Denbrock is going to run an offense that fits his personnel. And in 2015, you know what they had an abundance at receiver? It wasn't speed. I mean, it wasn't, It wasn't size. It wasn't strength. I mean, your biggest receiver from the year before, Corey Robinson, was not 100% 2015. Your next best receiver was CJ Procise, who you moved from running back to running back. But what did you have in abundance with Will Fuller and Chris Brown and Amir Carlisle? Speed. And so what did they do a lot of that year? Did a lot of stuff to generate big plays using speed, post routes, go routes, crossing routes, things like that. And they played to it. And so then Notre Dame was able to utilize their speed. So we know that he will fit what they are, what the personnel is. And so he's a guy that is a proven track record. He's built outstanding offenses at Notre Dame in the past. He built an outstanding offense at Cincinnati by his final years. I mean, we talk about what does your pass game do in their biggest moments, and obviously in 2021, they were just outclassed by Alabama. They didn't have the players to be able to compete with Alabama. But look what they did throwing the football against Notre Dame in 2021. 19 of 32 for 297 yards, 9.3 per attempt, 2 touchdowns, no picks, and a 157.97 quarterback rating against a pretty good Notre Dame defense that year, and Marcus Freeman running the defense. You go look at what he did in the AAC title game. They only threw the ball 11 of 17 times, completed 11 of 17 passes in a 35-20 win, but it went for 190 yards, 11.2 per attempt, 3 touchdowns, and a 216.83 passer rating. And you turn Desmond Ridder into a legitimate, big play passer. So we've seen the moments where they've been able to do that at Tulsa with the talent he had there. I mean, at Cincinnati, he also did it against Tulsa the year before in the AAC title game. 19 of 29 for 269 yards, 9.3 per attempt. So we saw what he was able to do at Cincinnati, the way he was able to build those pass offenses and be effective in those seasons. And we saw what he did at LSU in his 2 years there. And now it's about, okay, now you're going into year 2 at Notre Dame. I think the system will be more geared to fit what he ultimately wants. Not that he has any issue building an offense around Riley Leonard. It's more so as like, hey, I'm going to build a great offense around you, young man. But we're going to try to take things to another level as we get the offense where I want it to be. And that's where we're talking about. So, when you get to that point, if you look at like the 2015 offense, for example, with your backup quarterback playing all but the first 7 quarters of the season, you averaged 8.7 yards per attempt, 14 yards per completion. That's a pretty good number. Completion percentage wasn't where you needed to be, 62.6. You did throw 10 interceptions that year, 25 touchdowns. Part of that was you had a redshirt freshman quarterback who made he just wasn't a great decision maker in Deshaun, and some really bad picks that year. But you threw for 258.8 yards per game. A lot of those numbers were where you want them. If Notre Dame this season, for example, Trev, if you're to tell me next year Notre Dame's going to average 8.7 yards per attempt and 14 yards per completion, I'm like, we're going to have a lot of freaking fun watching this football team.
Yeah.
A lot of fun watching this football team. Now, there's other things about that offense that need to get better. They had 20 turnovers that year, 10 fumbles lost and 10 interceptions. Can't have that, right? But when I look at it, there were aspects of it there that were there. And, that the turnovers are why that team didn't score more. There's other reasons why that team didn't score more, but some of the numbers were really impactful. And the other thing is you saw that part of that pass game step up in those big games. They threw the ball, like they struggled early against Clemson, but then really stepped up and in the second half started getting some things going. And again, you're talking about Mike Denbrock knowing how to use running backs. What was the play that sparked Notre Dame's comeback against Clemson in 2015, Trev? Let's test your memory.
It was
Don't you hate it when I do this? And
it was a wheel route to CJ Procise.
My man, out of the backfield, 50-yard touchdown. That's exactly right. And so he utilized that, and that sparked Notre Dame's comeback. I'm so glad you got that right. Sorry that I tested you that way, but it's just fun, kind of fun, because I usually know you're going to get it right. They were down 21 to 3 at that point in time. And this is the fourth quarter, and that sparked their comeback. And then they hit a crossing route to Will Fuller, crossing route to Chris Brown. But they end up going 19 of 34 for 321 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick in that game. Now, there's some plays they missed, some reads they missed. Deshaun Kaiser had Alize Mack wide open up the seam in the first half for a touchdown, but ended up throwing a go route to Corey Robinson in double coverage. I mean, so the decision-making still has to be better. But schematically, they were there. And you go back and look at that same season, and you think of the other big game they lost against Stanford. They lost to 3 teams that year that finished in the top 5. Clemson, who was the national runners-up, Ohio State, who had the most talented team in the country, and then Stanford, who also finished that year in the top 5, that Christian McCaffrey-led Stanford team. They lost to Stanford 38-36. They didn't lose that game because of their offense. Now, because their offense couldn't score. The Deshaun Kaiser turnovers hurt you, that fumble he had late in the first half. But the point is, your offense was moving the ball in that game. And in that game, Notre Dame went 13 of 25. That's it. But for 234 yards and a touchdown. And then rushed for 299. I mean, so your offense was putting in the work in that game. Deshaun had a few misses in that game, but the point is, you hit the big plays. You complemented your run game effectively. And even in the Ohio State game, Deshaun goes 22 of 37 for 284 yards and 2 touchdowns. You struggle in that game because A, your defense could not stop Ohio State. And then B, your run game was ineffective. But they started kind of getting going in the second quarter of that game. If you remember correctly, Trev, they started kind of putting some work in. It was 28-14 at halftime, and then you score in the third quarter and make it 28-21. And then, of course, Ohio State goes right down the field and But the offense was kind of doing the work back then. Think of that offense with this defense. Think about that. Think about that 2015 Notre Dame offense with all its warts, losing your starting running back, losing your starting tight end, losing your starting quarterback, as it was with no changes, with all the turnovers, and give it this year's defense. Or last year's defense. And we're talking about that's a fun team to watch that can beat anybody. And so we've seen him, the point is we've seen him do it at 3 stops. It's not like he was mediocre at Notre Dame and mediocre at Cincinnati, but then he had that one magical year with Jaden Daniels at LSU. We've seen him do it all over. And at some places he needed more time. At Cincinnati, they needed more time. At LSU, he needed a year. At Notre Dame, he needed a year because that 2014 offense was pretty darn good too.
Man.
With Everett Golson.
Man.
But until all the injuries sunk in. But that's my optimism right there, Trev, is you got Mike Denbrock, who's got a proven track record, in my opinion.
And to your point, Bryan, another reason why I'm optimistic about Mike Denbrock is because those offenses weren't the same. You know what I mean? I think it would be another thing, too, if you look at, okay, well, he's had success at this stop at Cincinnati and LSU and Notre Dame back in the 2010s, but they were all the same type of offense. I think that would give me a little bit of pause going into 2025. I think it's just a testament to Mike Denbrock is a chameleon. He can morph his game plan. He can morph his schematics based on the team that he has in front of him. Now, obviously, through recruiting, he wants to build it more to the scheme that he wants to run. But Cincinnati in 2021 could not have been a more polar opposite offense of LSU in 22 and 23. But he ran effective offenses with all 3 of those because he's a good offensive coordinator. It's the same thing with Notre Dame back in 2015. They had a lot of speed, but that team didn't have a Brian Thomas, a 6'4" guy who could take the top off of defense like that. kind of had it, I guess, with Alec Pierce, because now I guess he's a deep threat for the Colts.
He was 6'3". He wasn't Brian Thomas, but yeah, I mean, think of the big play they hit against Notre Dame with him up the seam on that last drive of the second quarter. Yeah, he had some wheels. He could be that guy there.
But it's all been with different personnel.
And that year he dominated. He also had 2 tight ends put up a lot of numbers too, with Leonard Taylor and Josh Wiley.
Yeah.
So even though he had the 3-man receiving core, who had 3 guys in that receiving core in 2021 that all got drafted, I think 4th round or higher. He had Alec Pierce, Tyler Scott, and Trey Tucker, and he had Michael Young on that team. But his tight ends still combined for 54 catches, over 600 yards, and 10 touchdowns, even with all the production at receiver. But yeah, Alec Pierce averaged 17 yards a catch. He was their number 1 receiver. Their number 2 receiver in yards, number 3 in catches was Tyler Scott. He averaged 17.3 yards per catch. To your point.
Man. But it's all room for optimism for me, for Mike Denbrock, because he's able to do it with different styles of offenses. You've seen some coordinators go from spot to spot that it's, they have the same personnel. Might be different players, different names, and they continue to have the success at different schools. Mike Denbrock's been able to do that with different personnel groupings. Now, diving more specifically into that personnel, another reason why we're extremely confident in this offense taking off is the quarterback room and the state of the quarterback room. We covered a lot of different topics when we had the show about quarterbacks, but Bryan, give us a high-level overview. Quarterbacks, why is that one of your reasons for optimism?
Just because you feel like moving forward, whether it's this season or 2026, you just feel like there's just too much talent in the room for someone not to emerge and be that guy. And in the past, there's been so many years where it's like, if the starter doesn't do this, then they're in trouble. If Riley Leonard wasn't that guy this year, they would have been okay. They'd have still been a good team. They're not playing for a championship, but they wouldn't have gone off a cliff. And offensively, I'm referring to, 2022, Tyler Buckner goes down, and God love Drew Pine. He did it. Played his absolute best. He's a great kid, but you needed your defense to be outstanding. You needed your special teams to be the best in the country. You needed your run game to take over, because Drew wasn't putting a team on his shoulders and leading them to a championship. I mean, that's just kind of who you were. And I think of like 2020, if Ian Book would have got hurt in 2020, I'm trying to even think who they had. Brendan Clark and Drew Pine as a freshman. That was their backup quarterbacks in 2020. If Ian Book got hurt, you were done. I mean, your team was toast. 2021, you're relying on a true freshman Tyler Buckner or a sophomore Drew Pine. There was such a big drop off, and now just God-given talent. You have 3 quarterbacks that are better throwers than anybody you had on your 2022 roster. Because think about it, you're comparing senior version of Steve Angeli to freshman version of Steve Angeli. You're comparing C.J. Carr to Tyler Buckner, or let's say C.J. Carr to Drew Pine, trying to match skill sets, and then Kenny Minchey to Tyler Buckner as passers. Or let's go 2021. You're comparing Steve Angeli to Jack Cohn. Okay, that might be a little bit, Jack's got more in, mentally, but Steve's got a stronger arm than Jack does. He's a better athlete than Jack was. Or you've got C.J. Carr against redshirt freshman Drew Pine, or Kenny Minchey as a junior against freshman version of Tyler Buckner as a passer. I mean, just kind of go down the line. The depth at quarterback, and we're not even talking about Blake Hebert, who we don't expect to be a factor in 2025, but he will be down the road. You're going to have Noah Grubbs coming in after that, who's got a ton of arm talent. So you've recruited the position so effectively in recent years. And what's funny is it's been multiple guys doing it, right? Obviously, Tommy Rees landed the 3 that are currently there. I mean, for all the people that want to kind of be like, Tommy Rees sucked. Well, all the excitement we all have at quarterback for next year, he recruited all 3 of them. He recruited Steve, he recruited Kenny, and he recruited CJ. All 3 of them. Well, thank you, Tommy. It's kind of like how I said, Tony Alford's parting gift to Notre Dame was a class of Dexter Williams and Josh Adams as he left for Ohio State. Well, Tommy Rees's parting gift was, all right, I'm out. I'm heading to Alabama, and my parting gift to my alma mater is Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr. Thank you. Appreciate you. You know what I'm saying? And so just the arm talent in that room is so good, Trev, so good. It's gonna be really just that's where I'm excited, and it fits what Mike Denbrock wants to do. Because yes, Kenny Minchey's an athletic kid that can run, but make no mistake, Kenny Minchey's two most important traits involve what's up here and what's right here. Like the running is a nice little like icing on the cake, so to speak. I don't really like that one because why have a cake if it's not going to have icing? How about a little bit of a cherry on top, right? I don't need a cherry on top. It's nice to have, though. I want icing on my cake. That's just ridiculous saying. As soon as you say, like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. Of course you want icing on your cake. Like my least favorite, you want your cake and eat it too. Well, why would I want a cake if I can't eat it? Of course I want my cake and I want to eat it too. That's the dumbest expression I've ever heard. Cherry on top's a better one. Kenny's running ability is a cherry on top to a wonderful Sunday. And CJ's a pretty good athlete too that can run, which again, cherry on top of a wonderful Sunday. Steve showed he's got some mobility. Now, there's a difference between pocket feel, which Steve is not good with so far, but then being athletic enough to run. He's shown he can scramble and run. He showed that against Oregon State, but please, for the love of God, Steve, don't try to hurdle anybody because we almost saw you get your neck broke against Oregon State. That was very scary. I'm being dead serious. That was scary when he landed. I was like, oh, my God, that's not good.
Yeah.
So don't do that again. But we saw against Purdue, he can break tackles. He can run. He's a good athlete. They're all good athletes. But their all number one traits are all their minds and their arms. That's what I want to see. And that's what has me excited because, and again, I know this is going to piss off the Steve Angeli fans. And again, Steve Angeli's a more talented quarterback than Drew Pine. I've said this before. Notre Dame's going 10-2 next year, no matter who's a quarterback. But to me, anyone that's being honest and objective is going to look at CJ and Kenny and say, but that's different. That doesn't mean they're going to be better quarterbacks. We're talking about just throwers. You can be a better thrower, not a better quarterback. But just as far as the arm strength, the velocity, the ball placement, the accuracy, it's just different with those two kids. And it's been a long time since I've seen a Notre Dame roster with one CJ Carr or Kenny Minchey, much less two. And those teams did not have a Blake Hebert and a Steve Angeli also on the roster. And that's what gets me, because the margin for error is so much greater now. God forbid you have to turn to Steve Angeli because the two young guys aren't ready. You know what? You can win a lot of games with Steve Angeli. Okay, CJ Carr gets beat out by Kenny Minchey, and so does Steve Angeli. Woe is us. I guess we're going to have that super arm-talented, smart kid from Tennessee that's athletic running the team. Oh, no. Heaven forbid. Or, well, I guess they're going with a redshirt freshman that's never played a meaningful down. I don't know how we're going to survive with that arm talent leading the offense. It's almost like you can't be upset with whoever wins the job unless you're just so obsessed with like a guy winning it. And that's why I've said to you, like, if Steve Angeli, who I think is number 3 on the list as far as talent, but if Steve Angeli goes out there in a open, real competition, fair competition, beats out Kenny and Steve, let's roll. Because he's going to have to be pretty good to beat those guys out. Let's roll. If Kenny beats out Steve and CJ, let's roll. If CJ, let's roll. As long as it's an open, honest competition. And heck, even Blake Hebert comes out there and just dominates. Okay, let's roll. They're all talented kids. And they can all win a lot of games in Notre Dame, but they can bring the passing element that Notre Dame needs a lot more of. And so that's my second biggest reason. And they're working with an offensive coordinator that has shown he can get a lot out of quarterbacks everywhere he's been. And that excites me.
Yeah, Brian, I don't have too much to add. We talked about quarterbacks last week. I think you hit all the major points for me. It's just the one that I would echo is your opportunity of missing is